Okay. Let's hope all the tech continues to hold up.
Yeah, man.
So we had a break. You had some good news with your AI stuff.
Yeah, it was okay. It's getting there.
Good. Which I, of course, have been on for ages now. And you kindly went to us and purchased us some Jarritos.
Yeah, we got our Jarritos game on point today.
Cheers.
Cheers, man. We got cheers these NYC glasses for real. Yeah, make sure you get that Yankee symbol right in there. Yeah, there we go.
So, yeah, I was trying to go for something Mexican, but we didn't quite manage to pull it off.
That's
it
okay.
looks more orange than. Alrighty, buddy. So, it is still
February 26th.
February 26th, but it is now 5 p.m.
5 p.m.
We were a little further on. We had a really good chat earlier today about First Nations issues. And now we're going to talk about something that I will try to start the conversation on. I'm a little frazzled today. I don't usually start drinking at 5 on the dot. I swear, Mom. I swear. But it's Friday, and I'm feeling frazzled, and we got to get all this stuff done, so hopefully this will fuel me up.
Yeah.
I figured it would make sense. You have a really intimate relationship with New York.
Yeah, man. Absolutely.
And I want to give you as much time to dive into that as possible.
For sure. I appreciate that.
So I figured how we should start is I will sort of get out my ideas of New York, and I will set my part of the scene for you.
Totally.
So that you can just have free reign to...
That sounds like a good plan, man.
To rock the clock for the rest of the time. So, this looks way less pretty now. It's next to us left. I really like New York.
Yeah.
My New York experience is almost entirely visiting New York, and almost all of it is in Manhattan.
Yeah.
There's a little bit in some other places, Brooklyn, a little bit in Brooklyn. Visiting family of Lisa's.
Nice.
But much of my relationship with New York has been, my mother lives in Philadelphia. It's a 2-hour drive.
Yeah.
I hop in the car, drive up, see New York, do some stuff, come back. Almost always a day trip.
Yeah.
There's this magical time of the day, as you may or may not know, where all the cars have to turn over.
Yes.
Yeah.
That's
so
right.
we would aim to be in downtown Manhattan at exactly that point, so we could grab a parking space as everybody had to pick up and shift.
Yeah.
And then we would leave the car there the whole day, wander around. If you remember, there was this thing where they had sort of there were sort of golden orange flags all through Central Park.
Okay, cool.
And that was one of my sort of earlier New York memories.
Yeah,
was wandering around Central Park amid all that. I went to see Eddie Izzard in New York for my birthday. Then we ate falafel across the street. It was at Radio City Hall.
Oh yeah, right downtown. It's a great spot.
I saw Fun Home on Broadway.
Nice.
I'm not a Broadway or musical guy at all, but I'm a huge Alison Bechdel fan, and that's her visual novel autobiography turned into a Broadway play.
Absolutely.
So my experiences with New York are very much in that vein. There's a couple more, but they're of Manhattan. There are wealthy parts I might have seen in a ballet or an opera there as well. There's a restaurant or two in there. Meeting friends of my mother's, friends of my brother's, wandering around, having a nice day, hopping in the car, coming back.
Totally.
I would love to live in New York at some point, maybe. We'll see how this conversation goes. Maybe that'll change my mind.
Yeah, man.
But I thought it would be interesting if I sort of painted this picture first of my idea of New York.
Definitely.
And the way I've seen it, and then we'll see what happens to that picture.
Yeah, man. Well, I think that's a really great picture because, to be honest, that's how a lot of people experience the city firsthand. That's how I experienced the city firsthand.
So did you go on trips and stuff?
Yeah, I went on trips. I visited family there. I have an uncle who lives in New York, so I visited him before. And one of the big trips I remember as a young person was the Model UN with Mr. Blair, which we mentioned yesterday in our podcast.
Which I missed, of course.
Yeah, but that's okay. That's okay. But anyway, just the kind of long and short of that is we were mostly near the UN. We were downtown. We went to, we did travel around a little bit, but we were Times Square. Point we went to, I think we went to MoMA.
Yep. MoMA.
Yeah, exactly. I think we might have also
been to the Guggenheim.
Yeah, I think we also went to the Guggenheim, which is great. And we walked through Central Park. So we did some fun things, but very much in the vein of we're in kind of either, we're not venturing too much past 100th Street, too much past, Columbus Circle area and into Central Park. That's the extent of where we're going. And I think, to be fair, that's pretty much the extent that a lot of people go to when they visit New York.
That's what a lot of people think of when they think New York.
Yeah, exactly. And those are very kind of iconic scenes of New York, and they're important for that. But
you remember and there's that sort of walkway on the old train tracks that they redeveloped. I forget
the High Line.
The High Line.
The High Line. That's also a great spot. And that was one of the things I did when I first got there. But to kind of start off, so the reason I ended up living in New York is interesting because.
So to set the frame, you were at Oberlin.
I was at Oberlin, and I was all set to do a master's at U of T.
Right.
So I was back in Toronto for the summer. I was set to go to master's at U of T. My partner had gotten accepted to Cornell for a program, but we both decided that we weren't ready to go back to school. Yep. We didn't want to go back to school, and we weren't ready to go back to school. My apologies to my parents. I probably could have let them know in a better way than, at the 11th hour saying, I'm not going, I'm going to New York City, baby. Instead. But anyway.
How New York are you?
Yeah, exactly. So, I decided instead to just be like, no, we're going to go live in New York City. The reason was, I think, it was an adventure. I think as well as I, at that point in my life, needed to, or felt like I needed to really test myself in a way I hadn't had to my whole life,
To string this back a little to the end of your high school experience. I remember you mentioning you were kind of depressed, and then certainly your life was school at that point. And then in university, I think you things start to open up a bit for you.
Definitely.
But you're still very focused on school, and I think...
Yeah. And, for me, school was in the same way we talked about, when your world's changing and a lot of things are changing, you kind of focused on your project and what was going on. For me, focusing on school and just getting through school was the way I dealt with things changing in my life and turbulent relationships and
you're dealing with a complicated relationship.
Exactly, just like you were, So that's the school. Finishing school kind of became my way out, my way to deal with all that. So when I finished school, it was a bit of now what? Exactly. I'd applied and gone through and gotten accepted into a master's program. But of course, when you're doing that, your final year, that becomes part of your schoolwork in a sense. So it's all folded in together. So I hadn't really given myself the breathing space to be like, do I really want this? And so it turns out I didn't. And that's the reason why I felt like I needed to have a different kind of experience than an academic one. I've been in school my whole life, and for me, that was New York. That was it's a big city. Let's just do it. Let's just have an adventure there. Let's live there. Let's see what happens. Literally that was it. I was just walking one day in Toronto and be like, no, we're going to move to New York City. That's it. We're just going to do it.
Do you remember where you were in Toronto?
I think I was walking... I was walking near my old neighborhood around Bathurst and Bathurst and St. Clair area, and I was just it came to me, and I was like, I think, we're going to go to New York City. That's just what we're going to do. And so we ended up staying at my partner's house in Syracuse, New York. They moved to Syracuse, New York, which is not New York City. It's not the same. It's a halfway...
It's not even really close.
No, it's not really close. It's halfway between Toronto and New York, so we took the bus down to Syracuse. We lived there for 3 weeks. That was also a lot of turbulent stuff going on, and I think we lived there for a longer period. We lived there for about 2 months, looking for jobs in New York City.
Smart.
Yes, just to have a kind of base camp to do that, because then we take the bus in and go.
So you decided to go to New York, and then you were like, you decide you have to make a plan. You need a job once you showed up.
Exactly, couldn't just show up.
So you go to Syracuse and sort of regroup.
Exactly, and then we could stay there rent free, but we're also closer to New York, so we can actually go into the city and try to figure things out.
And actually show up for the job interviews and that sort of
exactly, which was important. So
makes sense.
I remember my partner was.
Is there a quick question? Sorry,
Yeah,
is there a line that goes from Syracuse to New York?
Yeah, there's a bus. A bus. So we were living that bus life at that time. It's a life I've lived for a long time until very recently. I'm very well acquainted with the trip from Toronto to New York City. 12-hour bus ride.
Gruesome.
Yeah, it's pretty gruesome.
I did Philadelphia once, and I tried to avoid it.
Yeah, man, it's quite something when you spend that. We can get into that, but travel between the different cities is definitely not what it used to be. But anyway, so we ended up. I remember it was so funny. I applied for one job the entire time I was in New York. My partner applied for like 15, and we both I think he got an interview for maybe 3 or 2 jobs, and I got an interview for one. And the one job that we both got like an interview and turned out successfully was that one job of working for the New York Restoration Project.
I didn't realize you both worked there.
Yeah, so we both ended up working there. Fortunately, we worked in different parts of it, but no spoilers. My partner was so mad that they applied for like 15 jobs and I applied for one, and that's the one that we ended up going with. I was like, actually, I knew the whole time, But the interview process was fascinating because for people who don't know, New York Restoration Project is part of Americorp, and Americorp doesn't really exist in Canada, obviously because it's Americorp, but we don't have a Canada Corps here.
Nope.
And what it is basically it's designed for people.
Give us a quick rundown of the history of AmeriCorps.
Yes.
I know you know.
Yeah, exactly. So starting in the 90s, part of Bill Clinton, and the idea is it's practical experience for recent graduates. Most AmeriCorps jobs, to my understanding, are in teaching. More and more of them are in kind of the ecological restoration, climate resilience framework. But the idea is this is a job, it's public service. You're not employed, you're a volunteer. You get a stipend. You get a living stipend. It's not very much money. And then you get you can put your loans on forbearance, so you don't have to pay them for as long as you're working for AmeriCorps, which is incredibly important because I at that point had a bunch of loans, and I still have a bunch of loans. My folks made it very clear. It's like, I need to pay for that if I'm not going to school, They couldn't afford to do that, and I respected that. So that was the appeal of this job as well, as it put my loans on forbearance. All of my interest during that period was covered as well. I could get that all covered by.
So the interest was frozen.
The interest was frozen.
Got it.
And then they'd give you a lump sum of $6,000 towards any kind of school you wanted to do. So I ended up using that all to cover my loans later on. But that was the appeal of it.
So even though it wasn't technically much money up front, if you were a student, then it ended up being fairly substantial.
Exactly, and I had a bunch of debt, so it was like this makes a lot of sense.
I don't want to dig into on the pod exactly how much money the loans are, but
yeah, there's a lot of money.
It's a substantial monthly payment.
It's a substantial monthly payment. Yeah, exactly. And my school wasn't cheap, to put it mildly. I'll just say that.
No, I mean it for American schools, it wasn't expensive, and I believe he went on scholarship.
I did go on scholarship, yeah, and even with scholarship,
it was still
so expensive. So anyway, that's the background of why this job was appealing. The other part of why it was appealing was it was working with my hands. It was doing something I'd never done before. There are 3 different areas that we interviewed for as part of the job. The first was working in a place called Swindler's Cove. And that is let me actually back up a little bit.
Go for it.
Sorry, I give you a background on what New York Restoration Project is. So these guys,
you did AmeriCorps, now New York Restoration.
Yeah, so AmeriCorps gave them funding to employ staff as AmeriCorps to do this kind of work. So New York Restoration Project was started in the mid-90s by Bette Midler, the legend, who I know you're a fan of. Exactly. And she basically was really concerned at all the kind of lack of green space and the lack of environmental initiatives happening in the city. Parks at that time had gone through decades of neglect and weren't really taken care of. There was a bunch of empty lots everywhere. and she wanted to revivify the city.
Mm-hmm.
So New York Restoration Project was born out of that. They started working in different parks in Manhattan. They started buying up lots and turning them into community gardens. And by the time I had worked there, they had done restoration in quite a few New York City parks, and also had something like 50 gardens that they took care of across the city. So when we stayed in the Bronx for interviews,
Mm-hmm.
and the first interview was just a general level interview. So we went to the site where they had their park. It was on the very, very top of Manhattan, on the east side.
Mm-hmm.
So facing the Bronx, and there up there is a place called Swindler's Cove.
Mm-hmm.
Swindler's Cove is the aquatic landscape that they had taken over and revivified. So that was the site of where this base camp of New York Restoration Project was situated.
So that was their headquarters.
That was their headquarters. That was the operational headquarters. Then basically we go there. We have an interview. That's the first interview. That's just the preliminary interview. So then what we do is we have to wait and see if we get another interview, a field interview. So this is the second interview.
For sure.
We do end up getting that. So we had to go back to Syracuse, and then 3 weeks later we came all the way back to do our second interview. And this was where you actually had to work in the field with the different crews doing this kind of restoration and community gardening work. So
show off what you could do.
Exactly. So we did like a full day of work. We went to three different sites. The first was working at Swindler Cove.
And what was the crew like? Like 6 dudes in a truck, or?
Yeah, basically, but look even smaller than that. So the first one was you don't need a truck because you're just on site.
Yep.
So you're on site working in the cove, just doing plant care maintenance, picking up garbage, just generally taking care of the park. So that's the first job you can do. The second one was out in the Bronx, going through different community gardens, and you go there, you pick up trash, you do landscaping, maintenance, you're taking care of the community gardens. Basically, you're not really planting anything in the community gardens or growing anything there. You're doing all the heavy lifting that goes into garden care.
And you sort of, I'm trying to picture it, and you guys are basically, you're the dudes wandering through these little parks wearing those like
we have blue vests, blue uniforms. That a lot of people thought were cop outfits. We weren't cops, but some people they just thought we were. But anyway, yeah, we had a full blue uniform.
New York Restoration Project.
New York Restoration Project. We always had to be in it, basically presenting who we are, because we weren't city employees, but we were contracted by the city, so we had to be pretty official.
America,
yeah, exactly. So that was the second job, and the third job was working in Highbridge Park, which was this wild park that is on the northern part of Manhattan. So when people come to Manhattan, they go to Central Park. And for a reason, Central Park's great. It's huge, it's massive, It's this giant place in the middle of the city, but it's only one of the many New York parks. And whereas Central Park, because of the surrounding wealth, has had a lot of attention put into it, other parks in New York City that are, not as big, but of a pretty comparable size, such as Highbridge Park,
which I haven't even heard of.
Yeah, which you haven't heard of. I had no idea it was there. They basically had gone through periods where there's decades of neglect. There's a whole history behind that, which, I don't want to get into right now because it's really...
The only thing I would ask is where exactly is it?
Yes, so what's fascinating about... And here's where I like to, you got your TTC thing, I got my New York on. One of the things I thought about...
Well, you're going on New York.
You got to represent it here, man. As, you find parks in Toronto in the deep places, in the ravines. Part of our natural ecosystem here is because we live in a we live in the glacial retreat basin. Glacial lake basin that was carved out through glacial retreat, and that's where our rivers are, and that's where our watersheds are, and so that's where our forests are. In New York, and especially on Manhattan and in the Bronx, it's the opposite. The wild places are up. They're on the heights. Manhattan itself is a word in the Lenape language that means place of many hills. So
I can fill in one tiny tidbit here. Because I just read this book on geology. And Manhattan itself is a huge rock.
Yeah.
And that's why they can get away with putting up all these crazy skyscrapers on this little island, because it's really solid.
It's a real solid rock, yeah.
So.
No, that's really cool. Exactly. And so the whole idea with the rock is that it's really low to the ground at the base, and then as you go further north in the city, it gets higher and higher and higher. Right. So, famously, that's why things are called Harlem Heights. Yeah. Washington Heights, Hamilton Heights, where Alexander Hamilton's mansion is still today, So it's all about the heights as you get further north. In the parks and really wild places on Manhattan are way up at the top. So Highbridge Park was what we call an edge forest. It's a very thin but very long stretch of land. So
an edge forest.
Yeah. Edge forest ecosystems are really interesting because in order to be really healthy, a forest needs to kind of have mass to it. The roots need to connect properly. The mycelium needs a proper place to actually grow. Makes sense. You put a blob together, things are connecting more. If you stretch everything else, the communication between the soil ecosystem is not great because it's only going in one direction. So that's what edge forest is it's very long but very thin. This, at its most, it was probably 100 yards across at the thickest point, this park, but the length of it was incredible. It stretched for 50 New York City blocks from about 145th, about 150s up to 200th Street.
Right.
So, huge park. The New York Restoration Project
was it also at the edge of the island?
It's on the edge of the island, exactly. It's on the east side of the island.
East side
of the island. So, it overlooks... it starts in Harlem, it goes up through Washington Heights, and ends in Inwood, which is the neighborhood at the top of Manhattan. And it faces the Bronx the entire way. So really interesting landscape. I'll get more into it a little bit, but just to kind of set up the landscape we worked in there, and that was the third, and really kind of.
So your first was sort of at base camp.
At base camp.
Your second was, remind me the name.
In the truck, going through the Bronx Community Gardens, and then the third was Highbridge, the park restoration.
And did you guys go through the whole thing, or just a chunk? Or?
We did. Yeah, basically we did like a quarter day or like third days. We did a whole day of work. So we did 6 or 7 hours of work, but we split it up in between those two our three positions.
And was that standard, or were they just testing you?
They were just I think they were. Well, they said it was standard, but I have a feeling they were testing us a little bit, seeing how much we could do. And I think they said that as they wanted to make sure we could do a full day of work like that, because it was a really intense job.
So, Had you had a job before this?
Yes, I had jobs before this, but they were mostly part-time. They weren't full-time jobs. So I worked in kitchens before. I worked in I worked as a research assistant before. I worked making cookies at the university kitchen. Nothing
but all
too
sort
great.
Of in and around the university.
In and around the university, and then the summers I used to have a summer employment job.
Summer gig.
Yeah, doing garden education and stuff like that.
The dishwashing, I assume. So this was your. So what was it like? How did you feel after that first day of?
So it felt really good. I was I really, really wanted it. I really, really wanted it, and it felt right.
You were outdoors, and you were doing the stuff you wanted to do.
Exactly, working with the land. I remember just climbing up and cutting these giant kind of bamboo shoots down in this one garden, and being like, "This feels right. This feels great." In the middle of the Bronx, and I was just like, this is where I want to be. I was like, I'm happy here, finally I found it. And so
some people never get that.
Yeah, no, exactly. It was a really beautiful feeling. I'll never forget it. So anyway, we had worked in all of these situations, and then we went back to Syracuse, and then we had to come into New York for a third time. This isn't the final time yet, but we had our just basically, this was like a sort of...
So your general interview, your work interview with 3 different places,
and then
now...
The final interview.
Your final interview. Okay.
So the final interview was basically just more symbolic. We'd already pretty much gotten the job. It was just so we could go in and meet the boss. Meet the boss, exactly. so that was very nice, and it was my first kind of experiencing looking at the stratification of this organization. So, one hand, I had only known the organization this far, like to have a base camp and to be outdoorsy, really boots on the ground, working class, like that kind of, gritty New York service, kind of parks department sort of feel to it,
And now you were in an office.
Now it was an office, and it was down right near Madison Square Garden. Everyone was dressed really well, very fancy, just a different level of wealth involved, And the organization was very much divided by that. It had a upper part, and that was in downtown Manhattan, on like the 10th floor of a skyscraper, and then a operations part, which was on the ground. And
because you got to talk the talk and walk the walk.
Exactly. And so that was always a bit of a those places weren't always on great terms with each other, of course, but it was just, that was a fact of how this organization worked and how I think a lot of nonprofits work. So that was really interesting. And I only saw the office maybe 3 times total in my entire time there. I hadn't, most of us never went down there, and most of them never came and interacted with us, except through like a couple of like company dinners and things, or nonprofit dinners or fundraising events or anything like that. That was it. So very much I was mostly just on the ground. So anyway, like to keep it going, is we end up for the 4th and final time going to New York and moving there.
So the third interview, you show up at the big office.
Yeah.
You just talk,
and then we get the job.
Nice.
We get the job.
Did they tell you then, or?
Yeah, they told us. I think they told us like a week later or something like that. But we had been informally told that we got the job.
Nice.
So we were ready. And so then the notice came. We got approved. We got the job. We're really excited.
In Syracuse.
We're in Syracuse. We're like, okay, we're ready to move. We're ready to make it happen. So we end up. Now I'll go a little bit just pretty quickly here. I appreciate you taking the time for me to say all this. This is the first time I'm getting it out.
Oh, yeah, of course.
So we end up moving to Harlem. And I remember we move in Halloween night. It's Halloween.
So did you have to job hunt a lot, or was it fairly easy to...
Oh, you mean room hunt a lot?
Sorry, yes.
Yeah, no.
House hunt.
Yeah, we did a few times. We ended up finding a place in Harlem that was $1,300 for a room, but it was pretty nice, and so we were splitting the cost. We were living together, so it was barely affordable. We were spending about half of our money on our room. We weren't making much money at all, but anyway, so we end up living there and starting to work, and I'll never forget it, man, because we had about a week. We were started work around November 8th. And I remember it very clearly because the day before we started our job was the election of Donald Trump in 2016. So that was the eve of us on our job. So election happens, and we end up just emerging out into the really early in the morning to get up to our work, and it's just silent, man. Nobody's talking to each other. It was a gray day. It just felt so strange, and we go up and we have a staff meeting.
And New York is renowned for its friendly atmosphere on the best of times.
Exactly. It was strange. I'd never seen the city so just cold. Usually New York's hot in both a good and bad way. Like people are in your face whether they want. They're ready to go. No one was talking to anybody. Everyone was kind of cold and alone. It was very strange. But anyway, we end up starting work that week, and I ended up going for the Bronx crew. So this was the garden crew.
Right.
And my partner ended up working in the Highbridge crew in the park. So I started to just, get to know my coworkers. I still am in touch with them. One guy who was our supervisor vet, he was about 28, 29 at that time, so a little older than me now. He was a hip hop producer as well as as a supervisor for this. So we got to know each other. And the other guy who I really got to know, who was a part of my crew, was Chris. He had been a chef and then decided to change careers. And
chefing is garbage.
Yeah, in New York City, it was brutal. Like, it was awful. It's the stories he had. It was horrible. As you know, you've lived that life, man.
Well, not the chef part, but yeah.
But kitchens suck. Especially in big cities where nobody gives a f about you.
New York would be about 10 times worse, for sure.
So anyway, that's where we started working there. So it was really cool because I was at that time, and I still am, but I was really into hip hop culture and learning about hip hop history. I remember like my first week. Vet, who lived in the Bronx, that's his name, the hip hop producer. He drove us past the address that supposedly where the first hip hop house party happened in the Bronx. It was like, this is so. He gave me a bit of a tour.
Grandmaster Flash.
Yeah, exactly, man. Totally like that vibe, you know. So that was really cool. And I was really into that and learning about it. And we would just play hip hop on the radio. So we'd play the major radio stations, which was Power 105 and the Breakfast Club.
The Breakfast Club.
Like Breakfast Club, Power 105, and then Ebro in the morning, which was the other one. I forget the actual station, but those were the two big hip hop channels. So all the new music was coming out. So it was cool because this is what like people were listening to. And
so you're marking the moment.
Marking the moment, exactly.
And this is just on the cusp of the hip hop rise.
Yeah, exactly.
Hip hop is in the midst of exploding.
Definitely, it hadn't quite become the dominant music form in the world yet, but it was on its way. This was when, to give a bit of a context, like this is when, like, you know, sad boy hip hop was coming out with Lil Uzi Vert. You remember like EXO Tour Life and stuff like that.
And Lil Pump.
Lil Pump was coming up at this time too.
There's a lot of littles back then.
There's a lot of littles, exactly. You know,
small people.
Yeah, exactly. They're pretty small. Yeah. And so that was a big part of us because what we would do is we'd drive around a lot, like you know. Maybe a third to a half of our job was just driving around to different gardens.
To where you're going.
Exactly. Yeah. So we'd work at a garden, we'd go. We'd work at a garden, we'd go.
And again, crew size, 3, 4?
3. So we had 3 people in a truck. All 4, like a pretty...
All on the front seat.
Yeah, exactly. So I usually got the front. We switched off sometimes. Occasionally we'd have more people. But this was the setup.
Right.
So then, you know... My partner at the same time is working in Highbridge, and you know probably like a couple months pass, or a month or so, and we're into the deep fall. We're into deep fall at this point because we start in November, and then you know we're into like beginning of winter at this point. You know, into December or late November, and that's when I first started working in Highbridge Park.
Oh.
So the whole idea...
And that's where he's working.
Yeah, he's working there as well, exactly. So now this is kind of cool because Highbridge, you know, I want to just set the stage properly for people listening to this, for us listening to this.
Highbridge isn't the long, slim one.
Highbridge is the long, slim one.
Highbridge is the long, slim one.
Highbridge is the long, slim one. It's named after, which was really cool, it's the first land bridge between... the Bronx and Manhattan, so built in the 1800s. So that's what it's named after. It's a very high bridge. Like it's true to its name. They're up on the heights, up in the mountains of Manhattan or the hills, and it spans across. So it's the oldest bridge that connects those two boroughs.
Would you spell Highbridge for me?
Highbri.
So literally just Highbridge.
Just Highbridge together.
Cool.
Yeah. So super simple. So that's what the park is named after, and. The park itself is fascinating. There's not a place exactly like it I've seen anywhere else, you know. The big thing we were doing with ecological restoration was removing these vines. So, yeah the vines, man. So the vines were...
So where were the vines? So we're in Highbridge Park. We got all these trees that are fairly sparse.
Exactly.
It's an edge forest.
Yeah, it's an edge forest.
Where do vines
it's
come
thick
in?
enough you can't really see inside. But the reason it's really thick is not so much there's trees everywhere, but there's vines everywhere. Mm-hmm. So, you know, vines are parasites. They're invasive. They're invasive. A lot of them are, and not all of them, but most of the ones we were dealing with were. And what their main function is, they take advantage of trees. They climb around trees and they choke them. Yeah, exactly. They choke them. So. That's normal, except when it's thrown out of balance. And there's too many vines, and they come from places where there's no natural ability to stop them. And that was the case. So we would go, and our job in Highbridge, which I usually worked at once a week at this point, was to remove these invasive vines. Mm-hmm. And I've never seen vines this big anywhere else, but they literally were like this. I'm not joking. They were...
No, I believe you.
Yeah, no. Just to give people a size, they were... about that thick. They were size of like, a snake you see in the zoo.
The human neck.
The human neck size, seriously. And they choke the trees, so you remove them off of the trees, and
there's scars.
There's scars, yeah, exactly. It looks like the tree had been choked by giant fingers. It was very weird. Like, I'd never seen anything like it. Nature. Yeah, nature, man, exactly. And, in addition, I learned from some of the lore is that because this place, and the vines back in the day, as they still were, covered over the park, so you couldn't really see inside. You couldn't really see what was going on.
Tell me what you mean by that. So
yeah,
like I'm visualizing sort of like a grassy verge, and then trees in front of me.
Yeah.
I'm sure that's somewhat wrong, and then streets behind.
Yeah.
Like, let's say you're looking into the park. Kind of paint a picture for me.
Yeah. So you're looking in the park from the street, say.
Yep.
You're looking, and it goes up. It's up on a hill.
It rises up into a hill.
It rises up
in the distance.
Exactly.
100 yards or so.
100 yards or so. And it's a series of kind of hills.
Yep.
So it goes rolls up. You can't really, it goes high up. You can't really see how high because everything's so thick. So there's a bunch of trees.
And where do they start?
They start pretty much, there's a bit of like maybe 20 feet of grass, and then they start going up. And in the areas that we hadn't done any work on, it was trees covered over with these vines that had been choking it. So all these different species of vines, some like wrap around the tree, some shoot up and cover over, some start at the bottom. They're all competing with each other. Yeah, they're like a big snake's nest because they're wrapping around each other as they're wrapping around the trees. And so
there's like this fringe of sort of unadulterated trees.
Exactly.
And as you get deeper and deeper, the vine coverage thickens.
Exactly.
Got it.
Exactly. Totally.
Cool.
So that's the idea. So it really, in winter and in fall, it looks like a witch's forest because it's just all gnarled. There's not much foliage. It's there's these like abandoned lampposts.
And vines don't grow leaves or anything.
They do. Some of them do.
Some of them do.
Yes, but not at this point.
But not coniferous.
Yeah, they're not coniferous. And so they basically look like a witch's forest. They cover everything. There's these lampposts that look like they haven't been lit in 100 years, and they're completely wrapped over. The vines have kind of bust through them and just like busted the lights. They literally look like they have strangled the lamps, along with the trees. And I later found out that because this was such like a place that was very creepy, it looked really creepy, that sort of became its reality, because people would do things in that park that they didn't want anyone else to find out about. So that's if you
and there was a lot of coverage.
And there's a lot of coverage. You murdered somebody, brought the body there. I remember they had like back in the 80s and 90s chop shops in there. They used to drive cars in there, chop them up and sell them. So there's a lot of abandoned car parts in the park. People also go there to practice rituals. So we talked about in an earlier podcast, Santeria.
Of course, yeah.
Without getting too much into detail, one of the ideas at Santeria is you need to be near nature. And as part of those kind of traditions, there's an aspect that is light or beneficial, and there's also a darker aspect where people do things and they do things in rituals that don't necessarily mean good things for the people involved in those rituals, So there's a lot of that going on too. There's animal sacrifices, that we found, chickens just cut up and stuff like that. Horse heads had been sometimes get left around. It's a lot of stuff that gets kind of.
It's not quite Oberlin.
It's not quite Oberlin, and it's not quite, like Toronto Ravines either, It's very different, and much darker. New York in general is a much darker, more violent place historically than Toronto is.
More intense in every way.
Just more intense in every way, exactly. So the parks are going to be like that, especially the wild parks that are up and not manicured like Central Park. So anyway, all that's going on, and I'll never forget this one story. This is the one story to encapsulate it is the story of the man and the vines. So Highbridge, yeah. So basically, a man with Alzheimer's, this was years before I worked there, wandered into the park and disappeared. No one could find him until a year later, the crew I was working with the supervisor who was there at the time, he was removing vines from the highway because they're growing onto the highway that goes along the coast of Manhattan on the east, and they find him and he's like mummified in the vines, like they've wrapped around him and they've claimed him as one of their own. You can picture it in your head. It wasn't really pretty, and he had just wandered in and couldn't figure out how to get out of them, so they just covered him over. So it was that kind of place that for me at that time, with my imagination running wild, like it was just a magical, dark, almost like a dark fairy tale kind of place, and there was all this mythology around it. So that left a huge impression on me working there. So that's good.
So you're Highbridge.
Yeah.
This is the vines certainly is something that has lasted with you, but at this point you are. You've started your job.
Yes.
You're after Donald Trump's election is your first day. You've gotten a couple months in, and you say you started working at Highbridge at that point. How does that shape up? You continue working the parks and Highbridge?
Absolutely. So yeah, I continue working the gardens in Highbridge, and then the next big event is I end up having to move.
So what happened in the old place?
So the old place, we were in a building. The roommate I was with, she was pretty prissy. She wasn't the nicest lady, but she was fine. We ended up having a big falling out later. But anyway, she had let us know when we move in that the building was going to come under new management at the end of January, basically. And so there was a very small possibility that we'd have to move out by then. And
very small.
Then that very small possibility became a very large reality. Exactly. That certainty. Exactly. And so we end up having to move at the end of January.
Mm-hmm.
So where we decided to move was Inwood, which is the neighborhood right directly near our work, and near Highbridge Park. So this is very convenient, a little bit more expensive, or about this, maybe about the same that we were working with, but it was close.
Yep.
We were able to walk into work, and it was a tiny apartment. It was an apartment that was basically smaller than our place here right now. It was meant for maybe at most 3 or 4 different units, or maybe 2 or 3 different units. 2 or 3 people could share it comfortably. They had stuffed 8 people into it, including us, like 7 or 8 people at any one time. And I ended up living there. And so at this point, we're starting to get into spring. So you've been through winter. Exactly. This is spring of 2017.
Spring 2017.
Yeah, New Year. We've been through winter. We're working. Things slow down in the winter. They start to pick up. So our job starts to pick up.
Because things are growing.
And it's nice out. It's summer in it's spring. Sun's coming out. It's a nice time to be in New York. It's a nice time to be working outside. The days start to get longer.
Nice.
It's more intense. There are 2 very important kind of moments, and they involve the roommates that move into
2 moments. So you get there and people are fairly nondescript.
Yeah.
They're all just doing New York things. And
exactly. We don't really have much contact with each other. It's really tough because our room is directly next to, like, slotted right in, and we have like literal French doors separating one room from the other that have been locked and bolted shut, but you can hear everything through them. So it's not a great, and I feel it's not a great living situation for anybody involved.
No.
But there's a couple who move in next door, literally next door through the French door, and it seemed very nice. And then the guy tells me, he's struggling with bipolar and he has some mental health issues. He's been through a lot. He's about 37 years old. He's Latino, pretty tall guy. He's like your height. And he's been through a lot. He's gone through homelessness, and he looks like he's been struggling for a lot. But a very nice person, but I quickly learned that he can take things the wrong way very easily. And so, I have to tiptoe around him a little bit. I don't want to piss him off.
Just be careful.
Yeah, just be careful, So I learned that. And then what ends up happening is, like, about a month later, 2 new roommates move in. And They are John and Jane, and they're in their 50s, early 50s.
Right.
And John is an ex-NYPD officer.
And what's the rent at this place?
So rent at this place is, we're paying $1,300 for a room. Most people are paying $1,400.
You guys are in a smaller room.
We're in a smaller room. This is in American dollars, and this is, it's a lot of money.
For one room in an 8-person lot.
Yeah, exactly. It's pretty nuts, you know? So, excuse me. Anyway, we they move in, and I'm a little suspicious because I don't want a cop living with me, just an NY, even if he's no longer an official cop. But I'm like, at that point, I'm not necessarily happy about him living in there. But anyway, things seem fine, very nice, kept our distance. And then there was one day, and this happened maybe in March, so we're at March now.
Yep.
Also, thank you so much for letting me talk about this.
No problem.
You doing okay? You need a refill or anything?
Yeah, no, I'm fine. Thank you, buddy.
Okay. Want some of that?
No, I'm good. I'm not going to refill at some point, but go for it. Just don't worry about the time. We'll just make it work.
Okay, sounds good. And so moving at March, there was a very distinctive day that I remember. The days have been kind of blurry since then. And it was a very weird day. So I go in the morning, it's just me and Vet. Vet is my supervisor and hip-hop producer friend.
So this is still early spring?
Still early spring. This is about March. This is about March. It was March or April. And I think it was about March. And Vet tells me, I heard this crazy story on the radio or on the TV this morning. This guy, basically hijacked an ambulance and started to drive just, around the Bronx. He ended up killing the EMS worker. She got killed, and then he ended up killing himself. Now this kind of thing was not uncommon in New York. Like crazy stuff like this happens. But
it was local.
It was just local, yeah. And then we're driving around, we're going, and we actually pass the scene of the crime. So we see the ambulance. We see like the busted up the wreckage of another car in the ambulance. Everything's taped off. We literally go past it, and we're like, this is so weird. We were just talking about this, and we suddenly happen to go past it. But fair enough, things like this happen. Then I go home that night, and I'm washing my hands, and
you have a little kitchen area.
Yeah, a little kitchen area, and John, the ex-cop, comes in, and he's in really bad shape, and I remember him shaking. He's pretty short. He's about 5'7", maybe. He's not a big dude, and he's shaking. So he looks really old and haggard. Poor guy. And he has a bottle of Ciroc, coconut Ciroc.
Terrible choice.
Terrible. And he's drinking straight up. I was like, Nolan, come have a drink with me. So I have a drink with me. I have a drink with him, and he tells me, this person I knew for decades just died today. She's an EMS worker. And it ended up happening to be the woman whose unfortunate demise we had driven past later that day. So it's all sort of kind of synchronized, And for me at the time, that was really weird. It was like, why does this all happening at once? But sometimes that's how it goes. And he started then kind of really getting into his experiences of being a cop in New York City and what that was like. Now, to kind of preface this, I beforehand had been at Oberlin where we're talking about police brutality. Black Lives Matter had happened in started in 2013, 2014.
Of course.
So it's a big conversation. So, I'd never really kind of taking the time to actually talk to a police officer in this kind of new context about what their experience of life was. And he had a fascinating story because he had been through incredible violence. One of the stories I remember him was a car chase on the Brooklyn Bridge where the person he was chasing crashed the car and ended up jumping out with a Mac 11 submachine gun, and he had to hide behind the car and ended up shooting. It was like a
firefight.
Yeah, firefight. He had that. Another crazy story was him during 9/11 pulling up to where the towers were falling and him getting out of the car and his partner staying in the car and a giant chunk of masonry falling on the car and killing his partner. 30 seconds later. And then one of the most intense ones was talking about the crack cocaine epidemic, because he was a cop in the early 90s. So crack cocaine had taken over New York, and every year the rookies had to go down into the sewers to basically tick a box on a quota for the superintendent. They had to go and basically find all the folks who were addicted to crack, the crackheads, and bring them out and push them out on the street, because they couldn't have them living in the subway tunnels for some reason, you know? So anyway, he talked about that. Like, they had to go in full riot gear. People on crack look like the Walking Dead, he said. They look like they've just been,
especially when you're in a subway tunnel.
Exactly, yeah. And you know, you go and you touch them, they suddenly start trying to claw your face off, you know, and they don't feel pain. They're just full of adrenaline and the drugs, and they, you know. So he talked about that experience as well. And for me, it was really, you know, an important perspective, because I didn't think about, you know, this guy's traumatized, you know, like a military vet who goes and does horrible things, you know, but also is kind of more is for his country, right? This guy has gone and, you know, had to see and be involved in really violent circumstances, and, you know, to my understanding, you know, had really come out the other side and still been a really good person. Like, I'll never forget, he kept a little bit of heroin on him at all times, because if he was ever in a cell and he saw someone ODing, or not ODing, excuse me, going through withdrawals, which, you know, if you go through heroin withdrawals can kill you. Yeah, so he would keep that and be able to help them shoot up, just so they didn't die in the cell, you know, because a lot of people didn't care if they died in the cell, but he did, you know. So I admired him for that.
Just these bizarre little pieces of...
Yeah, just fascinating.
And you're sort of filling in this chunk of the narrative that, you know, fills in the sort of back part of all of this police violence and the horror and trauma.
Exactly.
And sort of balancing a perspective.
Yeah, exactly.
Still not pro cop, I believe.
No, still not pro cop, you know, and but kind of just like coloring but
a better understanding of where this culture comes from.
Where does this culture come from, and why he's had this, you know, why cops develop a siege mentality. They always feel like they're attacked, and I'm like, well, you know, because he's traumatized.
Yeah. And
he's had people try to kill him many, many times, and
that's no longer capable of telling the difference between safe and not safe.
Exactly. Which was something, you know, we found out later. But anyway, so this develops. What then happens in April is I end up having to move again. And this is the last time I moved before I move out of New York City.
Got it. So you are in New York City for 2 years at the end?
For about a year and a quarter.
Year and a quarter. So you're about...
That's not including the back and forth in Syracuse.
Of course. Yeah. So you're about a quarter of your way in at this point.
Yeah, at this point we're about like maybe a third or a quarter of the way in. Yeah, something like that. Not quite halfway yet.
Got it.
And basically what happens is I've had, as I mentioned earlier, with this other guy, this really tall dude who's like 6'3", this guy who's in the apartment right next to us. John and Jean are further down. We've had some run-ins in the past, but we've always sorted things out. I ultimately think he's a nice guy, but I just wake up one day and he's like screaming, and he's like, they won't shut up, like, what the fuck, they're going crazy, like, he's just going off. And I go outside to do some dishes, and he comes and he's like, I can hear everything inside your apartment, man. I can hear everything. Like, this gotta stop. I'm gonna get soundproofing on the walls. And like, I'm like, okay, man, like, you know, do you want to talk about this? Can we sort this out? He's like, no, we could have talked about it months ago, but like, we can't talk about it now. We're just gonna get soundproofing. I'm like, okay, man, that's fine, you know. Anyway, it was kind of nuts. So I'm like, okay, this is a little worrying. So I called my landlord and said, can you just talk to him and calm him down a little bit and get some soundproofing in his place? Anyway, I leave at that point because we get a week off for March or so. Right. I leave and I go back to visit my folks in Toronto.
Of course.
And I end up coming back, and we don't speak to each other. We're kind of just like, you know, settled it down. And then I remember this one time I'm at my job, and I get a call from my partner who's at home, and he says, hey, can you come back? Weird shit is really happening. Juan, the guy, is following me around. He's like lighting candles and having incense and like, you know, looking around corners to see if I'm looking, and he's like doing all these like rituals outside of our door and stuff like that. something's weird's going on. So I told my supervisor, and my supervisor at the time really, really helped me out. He got my back, so he had my back. My supervisor, Dante, shout out to him. He was ready to help me out and deal with anything that went on.
It's a good name.
Dante, yeah, really good name, exactly. He was ready to go in the Inferno with me, man, for real. Like he's a real warrior, an amazing person. Still is. Real gritty, real strong, but real compassionate New Yorker. He was only about like 5'7", but he was giant. His arms
5'7" both ways.
5'7" both ways. Yeah, he's just big dude, man. It was awesome, but small, but short, but tanked up, man. Really, really cool, really sweet guy, really smart. But anyway, he, so I go back. I ended up not needing his help. I talked to Juan. Juan goes ballistic and starts yelling at my partner. I'm not sure if you're a man or a woman. I'm not sure, like all that. My partner's trans. He's not happy. He doesn't know what's going on. And I'm like, okay, we gotta get the heck out of here. This is gonna be crazy. It's time to split. Yeah, it's time to split.
It's the smart thing to do.
Yeah, so I was just like, this is gonna go downhill. I don't want to live next to these people anymore. We end up going. I end up telling John and Jane we have to leave. We become close now, friends, and we end up saying like, we'll still be in touch. We'll come visit you and stuff like that, just to keep talking to you and being your story. Having your stories. We had a good relationship with them. Totally. So we end up leaving and going and living by my buddy Murphy's house.
So Murphy you met through work?
Yeah, Murphy I met through work. Murphy was a fun guy. I loved Murphy. There was a crew of us. So it was Anastasia, Drew, Murphy, Stacy. So I'll just go through them real quick because...
All sort of post in the same sort of position as you?
Not quite. Most of them had...
Post-university, but...
Yeah, most of them except Murphy. Murphy hadn't gone through... Most of them. Murphy was from the hood, really nice guy. He had a son. He was 25, 26 years old. Was looking to go change careers and get some experience in the field. So that was his story. Stacy was from the Bronx. She had gone to school. She had graduated. Anastasia was from Maine, I believe. She was from out maybe Massachusetts or Maine.
Maine's almost Canada.
Yeah, exactly. So she was from outside, and she ended up coming to New York and going to school at NYU, and then decided to do this. And then Drew he was a little older than us. He was about Murphy's age. He was from Kansas originally, and had come and done some school, and then come here. So we kind of, and my partner as well was the same age as
where
us.
Where is your partner from? Syracuse.
He's from originally. No, he's moved all over the place. He's from Missouri. I think he was born in Missouri originally, and then St. Louis, and then had most recently lived in Oberlin, and his family had moved to Syracuse. So from everywhere,
totally.
So it was like we formed like a crew of like 6 people who were around the same age, and Murphy heard that there was some trouble at my place because I had told him, man, like, I don't know what to do. And he said, listen, I'm going to help you out. And I'll never forget. It's so kind, man. Shout out to Murphy, man. Shout out to your family because his mom was in Section 8 housing in the Bronx.
Right. Section 8, remind me.
Section 8 is like Toronto community housing.
Yes,
rank your income sort of housing. And she, she was in the middle of the hood in the Bronx, like real deep Bronx hood. I never lived anywhere like that. It was kind of like the flip where
the
flip of where I was living before,
got it.
Which was kind of Inwood wasn't really posh, but it was gentrifying. It was like a gentrifying Toronto neighborhood that still had some scars of old trauma, but very different. But where I was living was like this no one knew what gentrification was there, man. Like this was the real
holdout,
real holdout. And it was gritty. It was like there was like a shelter, a gritty shelter where a lot of like old folks would just like get out and listen to 80s music till like 5 a.m, and they'd just be there smoking and drinking. So it was kind of like a crazy neighborhood. There's just I remember people just like getting out from the garbage on the street, just making sandwiches like right there and stuff like that. Like it was just wild, man. Like it was crack pipes, find crack pipes, needles in the morning. And I felt bad for this family because I was staying with my buddy's mom. She was pretty young.
So sorry,
Yeah.
Murphy hooks you up with this place in the Bronx with his mom.
With his mom, yeah. So this is a room. It's a tiny room, but she only paid, for both of us, it was only $500 a month. Wow. Which is incredible. That's a huge deal. Mm-hmm. I don't think you can get a place like anywhere close to Toronto that's like 500 now. You got to go deep Scarborough. So this was still...
Not unless you're like an Indian girl or something. Exactly. I'm not sure you want those places.
Exactly. So this was a real steal. Like, obviously the location wasn't ideal for a lot of things, but the opposite of it was that whereas where I was living before had a really nice exterior and nice things going on there, or the stuff going on inside wasn't great. Here was the opposite, where even though the outside was crazy and it was the hood and different stuff going on, like inside things were solid. Really nice people, really really solid family, that I really appreciated.
So that's where you were for the entire rest of the...
That's where I was for the entire rest. I was in the middle of the Bronx.
Shout out Murphy, man.
Yeah, shout out to Murphy, man. Really hooked me up, saved my ass there. And shout out to his mom and his family.
You gotta find another Murphy in Toronto.
I know, seriously, for us to hook us up, man, with a $500 place. I'm looking, bro. But anyway, so this is about April. End of April, May. We're getting into May now. So over the summer, I go back, and at this point, like, work is really intense. We're working 12-hour days sometimes.
And are you getting an hourly wage?
We get a stipend. We get a monthly stipend. So
is it not attached to your hours at all?
Well, if I calculated, it turns out we were getting about $8.17 or $8.25 an hour.
What's that in New York? Like $1 more than minimum wage?
So at that time, minimum wage was, I think, $12 or $13 in New York. So we're making less than minimum wage. But you have to remember, we're not employed.
But you're not employed, and your loans are frozen.
And their loans are frozen.
So what do you mean not employed?
So we're volunteering, technically. It's volunteer. So that's why they can pay us that much.
Right.
And then we also qualified for food stamps. So we were using food stamps at that time as well throughout that. EBT card life, man.
Because you're technically living volunteer.
Yeah, exactly. Now the scary part was, just as a little aside.
That's also crazy.
The scary part
was...
America!
Land of opportunity, baby.
Exactly, bro.
You can work a job, sort of, and also be on food stamps. It's a perfect system.
It's great, man. So I remember going in and applying, and the only reason we qualified on that wage, $8 something an hour, in New York City, where it costs $1,300 to get a room. The only reason we qualified for food stamps was because we were volunteers, so we technically weren't making any money. So I remember the woman just looking at our application, be like, "You guys make so much money. Why are you applying?" "Oh, you're volunteers." "Okay,
fine, done.
Done. Thank you. We're making no money, lady."
Oh, you guys are technically broke.
Yeah.
Oh my god, it makes you wonder about the rich people that can game the tax system.
Exactly.
It's like, I made $100 billion this year. Oh, it's all volunteer.
Yeah, it's all volunteer. Exactly.
Take your food stamps.
Oh man. So this is it's fascinating, man, and being like upper middle class white dude, I'd never lived that life before. To be completely honest. So it was for me an eye opener, to say the least. My partner had come from not great economic situations, so they had dealt with food stamps before and stuff like that. He had dealt with food stamps before, so he kind of knew the drill, but I didn't.
Yeah.
So the EBT card was like crazy because you.
So what is an EBT card?
Yeah, it's like a little credit card that you get. Basically, it has a set amount a month, and there's two types. One is you can use for like almost anything. Ours wasn't that. Ours you could use for food, except not hot foods. You could go to the grocery store with it, and you could go to a bodega and get like a sandwich, but it couldn't be a hot sandwich. It had to be a cold sandwich.
How would they know?
Because they'd sometimes have like inspectors come in, I think.
And why? What was the?
Because if you get hot food, you're not gonna work for it. But if you get cold food, it's not as nice as hot food. So.
Checkmate.
Literally, right? Like, this was it. So you'd have to be in the know and know which bodegas you could get like a hot sandwich at, because they'd give it to you.
I get grilled cheese. What's your food stamp?
It's like, and most would refuse, but every now and then you'd find the right ones where like they'd give you hot food on your EBT. It was fascinating. People would like sell their EBT cards for money as well. People be in the know and be able to get cigarettes on their EBT cards to sell. Like it was a whole food stamp economy going on, man.
Yeah, of course.
It's fascinating, but people were really resourceful. Anyway, that's like a whole other side of things. So, at this point, like we're actually starting to be in a slightly better financial situation.
Yeah, because you guys are paying like a fraction of the money.
Of the money. We still don't have that much money, and we're summer. We're still like one of the things is we're drinking a lot. We're going out, having fun with our coworkers. We work hard. We play hard. Man, those guys in kind of those environmental jobs, they like to party. And I was part of that scene, unfortunately. But so the summer opens up. Things are better. I go see a few concerts. I remember one was really exciting. Was we all had NYRP would sometimes come through and give us, because they'd get like donations. They got like donations to see Panorama, which was like our Edge Fest or our big music fest. So there were only a set number. So the morning of, we all find out about it. We don't talk to anybody else. We just order our tickets, and then like at noon, we all get our tickets, and we're like, yeah, we're in, guys, we're in. So so that was fun because we went to that together. I went to see like on my own. I went to see Tribe Called Quest and Nine Inch Nails. So as a birthday present from my partner, which was really nice.
Very sweet. Yeah.
And that was so those were some really fun moments. And then but in the context of that, let's skip like a couple months later. So we're in deep summer now.
Deep summer.
And there's fun stuff going on. The crews are bonding, At this point, we're playing tons of basketball, like on breaks and stuff like that. One point, I break the basketball net trying to dunk, and but we get it repaired, so it's fine. Like 2 weeks later, but people are kind of pissed at me because it was like 3 weeks of basketball, but that we missed. But anyway, we've been out. We were playing like every day at lunch, almost just playing basketball.
Just like in nearby.
We had
a hoop.
At a hoop, yeah. So that was super fun.
Is this in where exactly would that be?
So this is in Swindler Cove.
In the HQ.
In the HQ, exactly. The operations station. So they have a net there. Operations station. So that's been fun. And like some of the guys are like Barry, who's 38 at that point, still really good at basketball. There's Tony, the old timer, who's like 60 years old, and he's shooting around.
Tony, old timer.
Yeah, I mean, he's the one who works in Highbridge Park, and saw that stuff. So a lot of us play basketball, and we've been learning how to do it, and that's I've been learning how to do it, and that's been really, really fun, and just practicing. So that's the context of kind of what's been going on, and then it's about a couple months after I move out. So this I remember was early May, and I hadn't been in touch with this is mid-May. Yeah, I hadn't been in touch with John and Jane really, and I end up my ticket for a concert that my partner had ordered for me to go see ends up going back to this old apartment, so it ends up getting.
So you have to go back.
So I have to go back exactly and figure out where it is, and just like it's upstairs. So I I talked to John and Jane, or I talked to Jane, and I get the update on what's going on with her. And so, after that situation, then we're at the kind of final stretch of the year.
So you've been playing ball, having a good time. Some shit goes down. I'm in the new neighborhood, though, and that's been really fun. This is about big Dominican neighborhood, so everyone around me is Dominican. Cool.
In the neighborhood. So a lot of Dominican music, food going on. Practicing my Spanish a little bit. I'm not great, but, I know how to get by. And then we're wrapping up towards the end of the year. And it's coming up to where my contract ends. So in that, there's like a wild night where we go to a Grateful Dead concert, and we have a good time, and that's pretty great. And then we wind up basically winding down to the last bit of our contract. It's a year-long contract, and we've got to like figure out what we're going to do after that. So
of course,
at that point, things are really good, really social for me. And then my contract ends, and suddenly I don't see. And my contract ended in October, so it was 11 months. We got paid for 12, but it was 11 months, and we suddenly need to figure out how we're going to work and how we're going to find a job.
Because you guys are both coming off contract at the exact same time.
Exactly. We're both coming like really within a week of each other, a couple weeks. So my partner ends up getting a job in a nursery. And at this point, I kind of spiral down. I get really depressed. I suddenly don't have anybody I'm hanging out with normally because my job was my social circle at that point. And I keep ties with a couple, with a few people, and I see them. But at this point, it's like, I'm in the house, I'm with Murphy's family, it's getting dark, it's getting cold, and I don't have a job. So that wasn't a great time. That's when kind of things started to get really downhill. At this time, my partner is really frustrated with me because I'm not working and he's working at a nursery. I didn't find anything. I'm just there playing Mass Effect and being a total freeloader, and so this is not contributing very well to the health of our relationship either. I gotta acknowledge that.
No, I bet.
Yeah, and eventually I wind up getting a job, and this is very, very much at the end, last 2 months of while I was in New York. It's winter, it's December. I get hired at Dominique Ansel Bakery. Now, for those who don't know, Dominique Ansel Bakery is a world-class French patisserie that has... Patisserie, exactly. It has a location in Paris, I think a location in Tokyo, a location in LA, and then one in New York. And he's a very, he's an international chef. Apparently, he's very famous, big dude. And he's famous for the cronut. So the cronut is a donut with filling inside of it, and it's basically you open up the donut and it's made with so it's called the cronut because it's like
a croissant
donut. Exactly. So he apparently invented it, and that's the selling point of his bakery. So
the
Cronut, yeah, exactly. It's an awful job. It's my experience of NYC kitchen work, which was even worse than Toronto work and everywhere else. It's down in Soho, which is a very, very wealthy neighborhood in Lower Manhattan. Yeah. Really up, one percenters shop there basically all the time, and it's a really shitty job. We're there selling cronuts day in, day out. We get to take the cronuts home, but even that loses their appeal,
Everything that you were eating at your work.
Yeah.
After a couple months, you're just not into it anymore.
Exactly. I take it home to family. They get tired of it, They don't want to see another cronut again.
I don't want
no cronuts, exactly. They were even pissed if we gave it to homeless people because they didn't want a lawsuit. And I was just like, wow, man, no, I'm giving this to homeless people. Fuck you guys.
I don't want a lawsuit for the cronuts.
For the cronuts in case someone had an allergy or something.
It's a cronut. I was ill.
Exactly, man. And I'm like, wow, bro. Anyway, so fascinating stuff.
So you last there for 2 months?
Yeah, I last there for 2 months, maybe a little less than 2 months. And the Dominican family ends up wanting to move. Because the place is not great. There's cockroaches, there's mice, neighbors suck downstairs. Even though they're really solid and tight, they want to get out. So they ended up having to leave, and
which means you're out of a spot.
We're out too. And they tried to find us a place in Westchester, which is way to the north of the city. It's in the suburbs of the Bronx, up north. White Plains, New York, which is far to the north of the Bronx. And at this point, we're like, I'm thinking I want to go back to Toronto. Things aren't going well for me here. I'm in a shitty job,
My relationship
started with Fred. This is a natural way for me to get away with my partner. I didn't have the guts to do it there.
Oh, natural.
I had to, I figured I'd do it later. So my partner ended up going back to Syracuse, which he's not happy about. But anyway, the good news for him is he got into Yale, so he's fine. So he just has to spend a year in Syracuse, and then he gets to go to Yale, or 9 months in Syracuse, and he goes to Yale, so he's fine. And then that's when I come back to Toronto. And I remember we left, packed everything in the U-Haul on my birthday, and it was the super blood moon. So it was like the eclipse, 2017.
That's funny. I remember that night, but I couldn't see it in Guelph. It was clouded the whole night.
Yeah, we saw it. We got up early and saw it kind of looming over the city in the morning in true Gothic fashion. And I went and said goodbye to the park and said goodbye to some of my friends. And then we ended up hightailing out of there. And then I was back in Toronto, man. And I saw you a couple months later in March. So I came back February 4th. We spent a few days in Syracuse. and then I just took the bus back, and that was it, and I was home. And I was not in good shape, but we can talk about that another time.
Yeah, buddy.
Yeah, but that's it, man. That's
the New York
That's
story.
the New York. I left out parts of it. I left out
some of it has magically disappeared.
Some of it's magically disappeared. There's Inwood Hill Park, which one last thing is kind of fun. That's the old growth forest on Manhattan. That's the very
Super
top.
cool.
You can still visit it. That's the site of Shakarakapak, I think it's called, and that's where the Dutch purchased the land from the Lenape. So you can go there and you can see the monument.
Wow.
So I spent a lot of time there, even though I didn't work there. But yeah, man, that's it in a nutshell.
Perfect. Well, I mean, obviously you're never going to get it all into an hour and 15 or whatever this ends up as. But
yeah.
Thank you so much for sharing this.
Yeah,
with
thank
me,
you for holding space with me and letting me share it, man. I really appreciate it.
No, I'm really glad. This is one of the things I kind of hoped that we would manage to work out with this podcast dynamic, was just the ability to place these important parts of our life down on tape.
Totally, man.
So, New York.
Yeah.
What do you... I guess before we get to the final question, I guess I just want to ask you...
Yeah, of course, man.
It's a remarkable story, and it seems like a very New York story. But what do you what do you feel about New York now that you've been through all this, especially now that you're in a much more healthy spot?
Absolutely.
You're no longer drinking.
Yeah.
What do you...
Totally. That's a great question. Thank you.
No problem.
I think it's really interesting because the last time I went to New York was in February. It's about a year ago, just over a year ago now. To sort out some business and pay off a couple of debts, and it's I definitely want to go back, but it'll be the first time I'm going back sober, which is really interesting. And I think I want to see which relationships were based on use and which ones were based on more. And I think I definitely have some really good relationships that are based on more. So, totally. But I want to go back and see what the city's like when I'm not doing, no shenanigans are going on and anything like that.
Of course.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
So, looking back in the future.
Yeah, man.
How do you want your relationships with New York to evolve? Are you thinking about maybe living there again at some point, or?
I think if I lived there, I would... it's a really good question because I wouldn't mind living there. I think I'd have to have a time limit on it. I wouldn't mind going if I had a contract and a good job there. Mm-hmm. I think I'm done kind of working Joe jobs in that city if I can help it. It's not a fun city to just... have to try to fuck around in. And it's not in the same way a forgiving city. Definitely not.
A mill.
Yeah, it's pretty brutal. But at the same time, I love a lot of the people there. I love a lot of the cultural aspects there. I know I'll always visit it as much as I can, and that's what I take away. I take away the relationships with the place and with the people. So
remarkable place.
Man.
Well, I would also ask myself the same question.
Yeah.
I would also definitely like to. I love big cities.
Yeah, man.
There are a lot of parts of your story that I would rather avoid.
And I think you would if you went.
But,
you're smarter than I am about some of that stuff. So.
Well,
and we're at different places in our life. I think you going now, you're in a much healthier position and I'm in a much healthier position than we were a few years ago. So
I would also hope that, if I were there. Again, have a real thing, have some way of keeping myself alive, and not be living with other people.
No, exactly, man.
That'd be the goal.
That'd be,
All right, buddy. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much, man. I really appreciate this. It means a lot to me, man.
We still got one more to go.
We got one more today, but this means a lot, man.
I thought this one was really good.
Yeah, thanks, brother.
And there you go. You threaded it together.
Yeah, somehow managed it. Thanks for helping me.